Yes.
Hey, can you hear me? Am I coming in loud and clear for everybody? Yes. So come in, get settled out from the chilly rain. Thanks so much for joining us today on this event on the state of global action on food and climate justice. I'm Nicole Pida, and I work at the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems based in Brussels. I'm going to kind of situate this conversation a little bit in kind of a big picture context, and then I'll introduce the speakers, and I'll be firing off questions to them. And at the end, there'll be room for questions from the audience, and the audience is online as well. So folks online, gather those questions and submit them that we will be watching. For over 30 years, we've had an international process, an annual international conference to deal with the climate crisis and climate breakdown, the COPs, but the people that have been most affected and suffer the most, facing inequality and climate chaos, have seen little meaningful action. The social costs of climate breakdown continue to rise, lives, livelihoods, and ecosystems destroyed, but climate change has fallen down the list of global priorities. Emissions targets are being rolled back. Funding is shifting from climate action to militarization, and media attention is waning. Meanwhile, global fossil fuel subsidies, emissions, and global heating continue to rise. But the contributions to the crisis are profoundly unequal. The G20 countries are responsible for 77% of global gas emissions. High-income countries, led by the United States historically, have caused the bulk of emissions to date. And middle-income countries are now driving most of the new emissions, with China as the single largest emitter. The wealthiest 10% of the world's population alone are responsible for 2/3 of global warming since 1990. Meanwhile, low-income countries, responsible for less than 4% of global emissions, suffer the worst impacts. The poorest and most marginalized peoples bear the brunt of climate and ecosystem collapse and rampant inequality. They've done the least to cause the crisis, yet they're the hardest hit. Food systems, as we know, are both a culprit and a victim of the ecosystem and climate crisis, specifically industrial food systems as the second largest contributor to climate change and the largest driver of multiple planetary boundary transgressions. They run on fossil fuels. Industrial food systems rely on imported synthetic inputs, volatile global markets, and fragile supply chains, and they erode food sovereignty, deplete soils, pollute water, and remain highly vulnerable to climate shocks. Recent crises, from wars and conflicts to escalating climate disasters, have exposed how vulnerable this system is and underscored how urgent transformation is. Encouragingly, last year, the International Court of Justice issued a landmark decision, reinforcing that countries have a legal duty, not mere discretion, to adopt and maintain ambitious climate measures to meet the Paris Agreement 1.5 temperature goal. These measures, by necessity, would include phasing out fossil fuels and transforming industrial food systems. COP30 in Belém, just now in November, was the first political opportunity for states to put that decision into practice, but they failed to. Industrial food systems and fossil fuels were completely absent in the final agreement. And we're here to talk about that particular and other failures of global governance, to highlight the voices and the experiences of those most affected, and to propose bold solutions for food and climate justice. So here up on the stage, we have Joity Fernandez, who's a farmer, member of the Land Workers Alliance and La Via Campesina. We have Dee Woods, food actionist, co-founder of Granville Community Kitchen and member of the Land Workers Alliance. We have Barbara Hachipuka Banda, founder and CEO of the Natural Agricultural Development Program, Zambia. We have Anna Lepay, executive director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And we have Sabrina Espeleta, senior international programs officer at War on Want. Lots of amazing speakers to hear from, so let's get started. First, I want to talk about the climate COP itself. It just happened. Both Dee and Joity were there, but these COPs have consistently failed. The process is, it's breaking down. We haven't seen any emissions reductions. Emissions are increasing. So why? Why has that multilateral process failed? Why did you go? If this has been happening for so many years, yeah, to fail to hold emitters to account. I'll direct both those questions to both of you.
All right. You go first.
I would say failed. I don't know. I wouldn't say it totally failed, personally, but maybe I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist with a lot of deep experience of things. But yeah, it is definitely we are not reducing emissions at the level we should be doing. But I think also, it was an incredible convergence of people from everywhere in the world, the most multicultural, diverse convergence I've ever seen at a COP this year. I sailed over with a flotilla of boats that were all on their way to 21 days at sea with other activists trying to sail there. And then, when I got there, there was this convergence of boats coming from all parts of the Amazon with indigenous people there, with people from the Samid flotilla that had gone to Gaza, lots of other activists from other things. So there was a boat flotilla. There was a People Summit that was organized outside of the COP process, and 70,000 people were there. I mean, explain what the People Summit was. It was really interesting.
Yeah, so the People Summit, was like a counter COP. We brought our Candy Declaration from Nyaleni Forum, and it was another convergence of different movements coming together to make demands, real solutions for the COP. And I would question you, Nicole, about whether that is a really multilateral space.
The COP or the People Summit?
The COP.
COP, yeah.
Yeah. Right? Because I don't think it is a multilateral space. We have no power in terms of the decision making. Whereas in the Committee on World Food Security, which is the only space in the UN where we do, as civil society, participate in that decision making. Yeah? So I think the failure with the COP is what we see replicated within the entire UN system, this corporate takeover.
So I think when I'm saying it, about not necessarily pitching it as a failure, but there is really complicated things going on with the UN system. And we tried to participate as La Via Campesina with nearly 80 delegates and people there to be a part of the People's Summit within the official COP process, the UNFCCC process. And that's extremely difficult because you're put into constituencies, and there's a farmers' constituency, which represents both big industrial farms and small-scale food producers. And then we're supposed to come to some sort of compromise when actually the conditions that one wants is actually taking away from the land rights, and one's causing climate change and the other is combating climate change. And we're both supposed to speak with one voice. And then when we even try to speak with one voice at a very basic level to say that the food system is at complete risk of collapse from climate change, that we must take action immediately on land use change and all these things, it's not even in the final text. So in that sense, it does fail because the ways that we have to input into the national processes, into the NDCs, have to be taken outside of what happens in those climate negotiations. But what has happened by bringing so many people into that space is that we're really able to organize as civil society to fight for power within that system in some way. And that was really clear that that was happening in the People's Summit. So there are things that went through in the final package that were really interesting. We weren't able to reduce, to come to a fossil fuel treaty, but there was a Bellum package that looked at just transition, and the language of just transition was brought in there by workers, by small-scale food producers, by people who were pushing for the transition away from fossil fuels to be held with justice at its heart. And what does that look like in terms of climate adaptation? There was something in there that said, one of the clauses that agreed to tripling adaptation finance. Now, tripling adaptation finance sounds amazing because agroecology and sustainable farming are an adaptation measure. It is a way we can adapt our food system to climate change in the face of such tremendous difficulties. But that finance needs to go to the right actors. So one part of me, when hearing this and lobbying very hard, and all of everybody that was there within civil society lobbying for this, it was celebrating. And on the other hand, it was massive alarm bells. Because if that goes to global corporations and you'll hear more about false solutions, then that's a problem. But if we organize a civil society with all of the solutions that the people at the People's Summit were sharing with each other, it was Movimiento Sem Terra, the landless people's movement there, brought nearly 60,000 small-scale farmers there, sharing solutions to climate change. There were people putting deep resistance across society there. You know, they need to be the ones that are accessing these funds. It needs to go to the indigenous people that were coming from all parts of Latin America, all parts of the world there to say, you know, the future is ancestral. We need to look at our ancestral indigenous knowledge systems and get support for the solutions that we know and sharing their resistance strategies and their solutions with each other. But they need to be the ones accessing the finance. So we're at a crunch point that we can gain something out of this extremely failed process at this point in time if we organize to be able to access those funds. And then we know that solution, what's going to go forward, is not going to be held by governments. It will not be implemented by governments. It'll be implemented by us.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think what was disappointing, because even within the CFS space, you know, we had like a high-level event last year around the climate COP and bringing sort of food systems to the heart of the climate COP discussions, and they really went nowhere. Yeah, which was so disappointing, because this is years of work and negotiations with member states, with different actors, and then just empty promises and nothing.
Yeah, what happened there?
Yeah, so that, to me, that is the biggest failure. So how do we change the process if we want to put energy into a process so it becomes truly multilateral and centers people most impacted and most marginalized? I don't think that's going to happen. So what do? It's about people power. We create the alternatives.
Okay. Because you say the process, it's not a multilateral process, the COPs. And so but still you're campaigning inside. You go and you campaign. And I hear from different NGOs, and especially now that are so funding constrained, and it costs so much to get to the COPs, right? And we know how difficult the logistics were in Belém last year. Some folks are saying it's just not worth it. There's so many people, there's so many voices, there's so many corporates, every year more and more. It's not worth it. Like, what, my voice is going to change something? But you're saying there's an alternative. Sometimes, I would say, not every year there's a People's Summit. When the COPs are held in authoritarian petro-states, that's not possible. But when there is, could those People's Summits, could that autonomous, like, parallel space be one that folks can focus on more than the COPs, and how to do that, how to get involved with that?
Yeah.
I think we have to, I mean, we need to be smarter as civil societies to engage throughout the year. And, you know, the COP event itself, nothing gets decided there. You know, the nationally determined contributions are done throughout the year. You know, there's all these, very complex processes that are running, and I could list off a whole load of names that, you know, unless you're really deep into it, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But we need to get people watching every stage of it all and being the accountability that's there within those processes. Because I go along to all of them because I want to see what's happening, so that throughout the year, you can hold accountability to those processes and what's happening and try and get those little things out of it. I don't have any trust that the governments are actually going to implement this. It's civil society and our social movements that are going to implement the whole climate adaptation. Everywhere I've been in the world, I've seen amazing seed banks. I've seen people restoring land. I've seen people planting trees. I've seen people doing the most important work to hold corporations to account. And that's not being supported governmentally. Sometimes it is. And we can get more out of governments by holding that accountability. And then there's the role of civil liberties, because the land defenders, the people that are working against corporations that are fighting the war machines, are the ones that are facing huge clampdowns. At the moment, there's hunger strikers in UK prisons. One of my dear friends in the Land Workers Alliance is in prison, having, you know, spray paint, or being allegedly spray painting a warplane that was going to Palestine, and has been on hunger strike and now 2 more carry on, and yet the UK government is not allowing those fundamental civil liberties. And you see this all across the planet, where earth defenders, people fighting against corporations, people unpicking what is happening with a global corporate machine, are the ones where civil liberties are being defended. So we need to be doing the work to adapt to climate change. We need to be building the movements. We need to be building peace. But we also need to be holding accountability, and we need civil liberties in order to be able to do that. So it's up to us, but we have to keep an eye on all these processes, and we have to be in the processes so they don't win.
Yeah. And it's not just civil liberties. We need to think about how we're organizing. And I mean, the UK doesn't really participate very well in a lot of global processes, and especially as civil society. And I think it's long overdue for us as people. I won't even use citizens, because that's a whole other thing, right? But us as people to come together to hold our governments to account, yeah, to hold these corporations to account and come up with our demands whilst also modeling the world we want to live in. We have the solutions, all right? We just need money, and we need policies to ensure that, you know, there's some equity in the world, all right? But everything, you know, it's not just about climate, you know, it's about historical injustice, it's about the economic system, it's about war and conflict, and how food is being weaponized, right, in many different ways, directly as hunger, directly in genocide, directly now, you know, in the Caribbean and Latin American region because of what's happening with this massive land grab. Yeah, right? We need to get real, right? We do not have another 30 years in any form or fashion, right? We're on the verge of biodiversity collapse, right? It is time for us to act.
Thank you, Dee and Jyoti. I'm going to turn now to Barbara, Anna, and Sabrina. On that note of outside spaces, but also anything COP-related, if you've been involved in any campaigns, are there any campaigns that you've been involved with or you know about that have been moving the needle on food and climate, that have been moving the needle on policy or action on the ground, or even public narratives? And whoever wants to answer first.
Hi, my name, as she said, is Barbara Hatchpukabanda. I'm from Zambia. I represent, I guess, small-scale women farmers that have been working for the last 20 years to change the narrative that is out there at the moment. So I'm the person on the ground and not the person in the COP conference itself, which gets overlooked. But as we say, there's no negativity or falsehood to what's happening in the COPs. There has been a lot of good that's come out of there by civil society and the people organizing. And it's always great to see people create a movement that's going to keep moving the needle, even if as small. The thing is with people, we get overexcited by wanting the needle to move from 0 to 100 in 1 second. But we don't notice that there's success, even as the needle moves every 5 millimeters or every 2 millimeters. The reason I say that is, I guess I am born of, or our project, which has changed thousands of lives in Zambia, was born of an introduction from the UN when we had the opportunity to meet Shume International in Japan, when they were one of the sponsors in partnership with UNDP to bring more young people into action, which was the beginning of the climate conversation. But in those days, we called it the Millennium Development Goals, which then transformed, and that's the thing, we get bogged down in language. It goes from Millennium Development Goals to COP to all these big words that people get lost in the translation of it. There are a lot of movements that have taken place even at the COP level, where one of them I can actually tell you, the food systems call to action, which was one that was developed at the COP28, if I'm not mistaken. This is a coalition that's been created and brought together civil society, governments, businesses, policymakers that have all gone back and are working together to try change policies. Not every policy is for the good, not every policy is for the negative, but there is some good happening. The problem is our measure in society is very limited. If it's on the news and it's showing 50,000 to 100,000 people, then it's great. But it's not going to show you on the news if it's changing 10 to 20 lives, because that doesn't matter. We have to show bigger and better. So people get lost in the conversation. People get lost in the translation. But there's so much action going on out there, it's unfair to pinpoint one activity. We need to, one of the things about coalitions and working together, or networks, and what we're doing now, is we need to share success stories. Every success story matters, but because there's no account of it, we think nothing's working. And therefore we keep screaming louder and saying we want change. Well, change is happening, but you need to go to the ground to see where the change is coming from. So yes, I'd love to say one project has changed the needle, is moving the needle, but as you said, 70,000 people is not a joke. 70,000 people is something huge, and we shouldn't ignore that. But we're all focused on the politicians in the conference room, while there's a lot more action going on the outside. So as I've said, for me, I'm born of the UN network and the Millennium Development Goals. And this partnership that we created with Shume International, as we've said, has changed not only thousands of lives in Zambia, but is international. In America, people are practicing natural agriculture. People are practicing farming at a small-scale level, and it's changing their lives. But the problem is, we're not advertising it enough. We're not looking at it enough. So we have to create, especially when it comes to COP, a success story catalog that can be distributed on social media, in print, and in the World Wide Web, which is where all the kids are now. Social media has taken over. Everybody's on their phones 24/7. We need to publicize and publish that so people can see that the needle is moving and that hope mustn't be lost. So for me, I'm not going to pinpoint or target one activity, but focus on the generalization of we need to change the language. We need to change the focus from negative to positive.
Okay, thank you.
I'll leave it to you.
Anna?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I just was sitting here listening to you and listening to Joy Tini and knowing that Sabrina is going to add even more words of incredible wisdom. And I'm thinking about just the arc of my own, sort of personal day as a metaphor for what we're all up against, which is I woke up this morning, and you can hear in my accent, I'm from the United States of America, and did the wrong thing of checking the news this morning, and maybe some of you saw the Trump administration just pulled out of 61 global treaties, I think 30 from the UN, about 30 non-UN treaties, UNFCCC one of them, and and I sort of had this moment that a lot of us are having on a daily basis with this administration of just feeling like we are up against such an incredible authoritarian force, not just in the US, but increasingly around the world. And then to be here today and to hear all of you and know the incredible work that these including IPES Food and you, Nicole, this incredible powerhouse group of women up here and looking out in the audience, those of you online, there's an incredible group of people here in this room, that this is to the point of, you were ended on, Barbara, of we need to boost ourselves up with hope in the sense of we cannot give up, and there is so much momentum, as much as there is also failure, to not be blind to it. So a couple things I would just add. As Nicole said, my name is Anna LePay, based in the United States, but I work for a global organization that tries to organize philanthropy. We have 30 philanthropic foundations as members, tries to organize philanthropy in partnership with civil society and with policymakers to work on food systems transformation. And our members have been asking ourselves this question of, does it make sense to keep engaging in these multilateral spaces? And is there power there, and how do we build power there? And increasingly what we're feeling is it's even almost because we are seeing such a breakdown in these multilateral spaces, it's all the more reason why we cannot give up on them, and we have to keep supporting civil society leaders to really show up and have voice in those spaces, and make sure we have voices and we have folks like Joy T in those spaces to really bring the voices of farmers and fishers and those who are really on the front lines of fighting for adaptation and resilience and food systems change. So a couple things that I would just add to the conversation on this front is, how we've really seen, as much as we would want progress to be faster, to just reflect on the fact that now in the IPCC's language, in their reports, the word agroecology is used, that we do now have a global understanding of the power of agroecology for adaptation. We have language in the IPCC reports on maladaptation, that the reliance on fossil fuel-based food systems is a maladaptation. Now, we can all agree that what came out of COP30 didn't say this as clearly as it should have, right? But we know, and we have civil society voices who know that we have the evidence, and that we need to keep pushing this narrative. So I feel that there's sort of so much momentum there. I think the second thing that we saw coming out of COP is the real power of when you join up climate justice movement and food justice movements. And you both talked about the just transition being something that we are seeing so much movement and momentum around. And I think it really speaks to the joining up of movements around climate justice and food justice. And then the final thing I wanted to share in terms of narrative shift that we're seeing, when I look back on the last book I wrote was 16 years ago. I remember the date because it was the day my first daughter was due, was the day the manuscript was due to the publisher, so 16 years ago. It was a book on food and climate, and I remember when I reported out that book 17, 18 years ago, that there was very little conversation about these linkages between the food system and the climate crisis. That I looked at all the big environmental groups that were running climate campaigns, and virtually none of them had a campaign around agribusiness. None of them had a campaign about agroecology as an adaptation. In fact, the only one I found was an organization whose board I still sit on called Rainforest Action Network, and it had done this analysis and saw, hey, guess what? Guess who's a huge force in the climate crisis? It's agribusiness, and so had a corporate campaign around agribusiness. But you flash forward to today, and thanks largely to you all in this room, these incredible women up here, that narrative has really shifted, and there is such a deeper understanding that the food system and the industrial food system, as you said in your intro, is a huge contributor to the crisis, but also we know the kinds of food systems represented by us all in this room are a key part of the solution. And the big narrative shift that I've been particularly excited to see, and again, it's about joining up movements, is a deeper understanding from oil and gas campaigners and food campaigners that we are really part of the same conversation, that we're part of, as many of us are using the language of, part of uprooting that fossil economy. And that if we don't unite these movements, what we will see is the oil and gas industry will say, oh, great, you want to electrify your grid, you want to put solar on your houses. It's fine by us. Our oil and gas can go into plastic. Our oil and gas can go into petrochemicals that will show up as agrochemicals in the fields. Our oil and gas can be used to build out the synthetic fertilizer industry, the ammonia industry. And so groups like the Center for International Environmental Law, FoodRise, I think some FoodRise folks are here as well, and IPES Food, part of this conversation to make sure that we don't create an escape hatch in industrial agribusiness for the oil and gas industry. And that narrative change, I feel like, has been really significant, and people are really understanding that, and we need to make sure that we keep helping people make these links so that we can be stronger and we can keep making, again, it might not be as fast as the progress we know we need, but keep making progress. Yeah.
Thank you. Sabrina.
Everything has been said, so. No, well, yeah, I mean, the negatives, I've seen some negatives and some positives. One of the negatives, for sure, is that a lot of the concentration has always been in the last year on, energy transition, etc. But we are starting to talk also in these spaces about just transitions in food systems. So that's a really good thing. I think that we still need to apply that systemic analysis, because the campaigns that I've been analyzing, particularly in those multilateral spaces, are still focused on, for example, individual responsibility of consumption on certain products, etc., rather than seeing the entire system of the agribusiness, monoculture system, pesticides, fertilizers, etc., that needs to be changed. But what I see as a positive thing is that particularly this year with Brazil, the COP in Brazil, where we come from a series of COPs where civil society couldn't have much presence. So they've already mentioned the People Summit, but it was a very powerful space where for the first time really many movements could talk about just transition in food systems, food justice, food sovereignty from so many different perspectives, from land rights, from the issue of agrotoxics, like they call them in the southern cone region, to the issues of farm workers, to the issues of transition to agroecology, and that was really on the agenda. And it's not a coincidence, because Brazil has a state policy on agribusiness. Whether you have a left-wing or a right-wing government, it's like Argentina, the same. I'm partially from Argentina, so I'm very interested in the southern cone region of Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil are like the huge agribusiness powerhouses, no? So in those countries, agribusiness is a state policy. It's not. It doesn't change whether the government changes. So because it's part of their development project, and it's part of how those economies have been shaped by colonial times, no? So it's been very interesting for me to see how many movements, grassroots farmers movements and farm workers could be there in Belém and talk about food sovereignty as an alternative, and also bring the food in the collective lunches as an alternative, as a climate justice alternative. So yeah, I'm trying to look at the half full glass in this case.
It's true that we are talking more about food and climate together, but agribusiness also is starting to talk about climate, and they're bringing lots of what they call solutions to the table, and they're getting a lot of investment and political attention. Can you list some of them that we should be most worried about, and what kind of problems they might bring?
Sure.
Maybe Anna, you can start.
Okay.
Oh, and then Barbara.
I guess I'll start. Yet again, I'm going to go back to the language. It's a big thing for me. When we now are using the term just transition, and we're using climate and food systems, as we've said, we're looking at industrial agribusinesses. Yet again, if no one realizes it, yes, there's the mention of small-scale farming, but that's not highlighted at ground level. And I say this because I come from a country where 90% of its population relies on agriculture. Now, 90% of a population relying on agriculture, these are small-scale farmers. This is their daily bread and butter. This is what feeds them. This is what provides their families. This is what they rely on to ensure they send their children to school. Yes, we've got free education, but parents want more for their children. They want to be able to send them to that free education with shoes and school bags and food in their backpacks. Now, the two don't coincide because, yes, for years, nobody wants to mention climate issues and food systems are interconnected. But when you're living in an African country and you were born in an environment where your grandfather could tell you when the rain is going to come and how that rain is going to impact your food source or your yield at the end of that farming season, it's a big issue. When 20 years down the line or in your adult years, everything has been decimated. You've got much more drought. If it moves from drought, it's gone to overflooding. And then you've got the people who are supposed to look after you pushing policies like you cannot save seed because patented laws. Okay, but I've got indigenous seed which has been passed down generation after generation. And the seed survives. My yield won't be as big as this room, but it's enough to support my family with food for this season. What I would like you to do as the policymakers, as the leadership we've selected to look after us, is provide us with alternative businesses and support through cooperative systems and things like that, and equipment, irrigation, and things like that to assist us to grow indigenous farming methods. But no, you're coming and you're changing policies and saying, you can't save seed, we're going to push more fertilizer on you, we're going to push more inputs. But I'm sorry, the climate's not allowing for it. When drought happens, those inputs and those fertilizers are producing nothing. And therefore, as a government, then, you know, the headline in the news, 45% of our sorghum or 60% of our maize crop yield for the year 2023 has been decimated. Well, it's your fault as a government, because you should have solutions which allow for us to be able to combat these issues. And that's the thing, it's the language. So right now, everybody's still talking about just transitions in food systems and climate. So the words are being said, but nobody's actively going to areas where farmers drastically need it, where their lives are dependent on it. Let's not talk about agribusinesses and food systems and then push the agenda of fertilizers and inputs and say, hey, we're supporting farmers. No, you're not, because you're not going to the grassroots. So for me, was it 2 years ago? I need to come back during the COP. There was the carbon credits. Every African country was on that bandwagon. Everybody was growing trees. But ask me, where are those trees 2 years later? They died, but we got the money for the carbon credits. So it's all in the language. It's great. We're using this massive language that confuses everybody, but the agenda and the process doesn't change at the grassroots. There are still people suffering, while in other areas we're producing a lot of food waste, because what we're doing is producing air food, as I call it. It's air food, it's growing everywhere, it's like a weed, and then we're selling it in supermarkets, and yet again, another issue, it's interconnected to our health. There's so many aspects of this that are not being addressed because it's easier to talk about the language and then we hide behind that. So for me, let's stay away from the language and let's start working on the ground. That is the big thing for me.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying about the language. I mean, I even think, and I can't remember, Nicole, if you and I have spoken about this, but even the term false solutions, I always struggle with that term because it uses, you know, good communicators will know, like, never say the word that you don't want people to think about in the phrase, right? So even false solutions, it gets people thinking, maybe it is a solution. So I like to think of these kinds of false solutions in the food system as like dangerous distractions. You know, they're really distracting us from the real solutions that we know benefit community, benefit the land, benefit biodiversity, benefit our health. And so then but there are so many of these false solutions, dangerous distractions out there in the food system. If you all haven't seen it, I really recommend, I think Sophia, I see you out here in the audience from the Institute for Food and Agriculture Trade Policy, has a great, really short white paper on false solutions, kind of like a, how do you know when you see it, when you're getting told there's a solution in the food systems? And so if you haven't seen it, I recommend that resource from IATP. But what we're seeing so much of these dangerous distractions, and it's, you know, it's hard to push back against them because the way they're presented can be so compelling. So for instance, we're seeing a rush by industry into things like, you know, calling blue ammonia, you know, the solution. And I see Lisa from the Center for International Environmental Law here in the audience, and they've been talking about ammonia mania, that there's such a craze around ammonia. And, you know, knowing that what we're really doing is just locking in the built environment on a really extractive industry, which is the ammonia that's either going to be used to make synthetic fertilizer, or increasingly industry is saying this blue ammonia is theoretically a great ecological alternative for a shipping industry, when we know it really is not, and that carbon capture and storage of blue ammonia is not all that it's cracked up to be. So I think for those of us who, you know, again, I sit kind of in this space right now within philanthropy, how can I educate, you know, the philanthropic partners about these dangerous distractions, help ensure that their much needed grant dollars are actually going to solutions that are really systemic solutions, that are real solutions, and not propping up these dangerous distractions? Like, I know philanthropic dollars are going into things like subsidizing corn-based ethanol. Why? That is such a dangerous distraction. So how, within philanthropy, can we help educate each other about real solutions? And then from the civil society side, how can the investigative, investigative journalists and groups like iPass Food, help really, and IATP, and CL, be exposing these dangerous distractions, and then civil society groups, again, like you were saying, Barbara, really show the real solutions that are working on the ground and tell those stories and keep telling those stories so that those are the kinds of investments that the public sector is investing in, that the private sector is supporting, that philanthropy is supporting.
Yeah. Sabrina, did you want to jump in with any?
Yeah, I mean, language is so important because the corporations are also really good at co-opting language from the movements. It has happened so many times, but other, corporate solutions, I would call them, the biofuels is one of them, and also is connected with, with the land rights, with the land grabs, and with seeing lands as a financial asset. So all the issue of financialization of land for, carbon markets and biofuels is a really, really huge issue because people are being displaced from the communities, especially in the Global South, but not only in the Global South. Then another false solution that is increasingly common is the so-called climate smart agriculture. It's a really cool name. And precision agriculture, technology, drones. It's super cool, no? But no people. You don't see people anymore. Just farming without farmers. But then again, who benefits from these solutions? You always have to go back to who benefits. Is the people, the farmers, or the corporations, the rural communities or the corporations? And again, who owns the data of these technological fixes and dronings? And again, corporations own the data. Who owns the land where these biofuels are produced? Corporations own the land, or asset managers. So for me, it's for us, as what I want. Also, we see always as a systemic issue, and follow also the where corporate power lies, and the alternative solutions are always the movement solutions and people solutions. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of I really like the language of dangerous distractions. Mm-hmm. They're focused in climate just on emissions, just on carbon even. Mm-hmm. And there's so many more. We need to be thinking about food sovereignty. You're all saying, how does this impact human health, and all of these different other elements to consider. So we've talked about, this kind of breakdown in multilateralism in many systems, but we're talking about also autonomous alternative spaces that are really promising. So I want to talk a little bit more about, is there any multilateral space that we can actually still trust and go to and for real action, real, holistic, systemic action, but also listening to the grassroots social movements and the real solutions that we're talking about? Or are there autonomous spaces that we should be going to more with the solutions that you're saying, these success stories, the real, what's actually a real solution from the grassroots that we need to be talking about more? So I'll start actually with Jyoti and then run down the line to hear from each of you on this.
I definitely believe the power lies in so many different cosmovisions and different ways that people have interacted with the land, but the kind of alliances that I see in the indigenous peoples movements and Via Campesina and in the World Forum of Fisher Peoples, with people who are really rooted in solutions that are based in their communities, always going towards them. And, I believe within the kind of institutional space, there's so many people who are actually really got their heart in the right place, that want to be doing the right thing, but they're so crazily organized, and then there's all the powers at play and all the reasons why the people that are in power want to maintain power. and everything that we have to work our way through, but there are cracks in there that we can start to get the solutions that are coming from the very broad-based coalitions of people with so many solutions in every cosmovision in the world, really, that they can be drawing from, but we've got to get them access to that power in a way that is very legitimate. And, you know, it was very difficult at the last talk. There was a case in point was something that was rolled out. There were so many indigenous people there, more than I've ever seen in an institutional space, you know, including like breastfeeding moms all covered in body paint on the floor, and, you know, nanas wandering around straight out of the forest in their beads and nothing else, you know. And it was really wonderful to have that groundedness of the presence of indigenous people there. But they launched off the back of all of this organizing this facility called the Tropical Forest Forever facility, which was actually incredibly dangerous, right? So, you know, civil society and that presence has raised the profile of forest protection and the inextricable role of indigenous people in forest protection. Yet, when they launch a facility, it's one where they were getting governments to donate into a facility where they were going to refinance Global South debt through a financial mechanism that refinanced Global South debt, use that to invest into the global economy, and we want debt canceled, right? We don't even want anybody to refinance it. Just get rid of it. It's responsible for most Global South poverty, right? And the lack of social services everywhere in the Global South. But yet they were going to refinance Global South debt, try and gain profit off it. Where do we gain profit? Anywhere in this global system. It's got to be something dodgy. And then 20% of that would go back to indigenous people to do the work that they've been lobbying and campaigning for access to resource for decades now. And on the other side, you get civil society going, we need reparations, goddammit. You've taken our land, you've taken our knowledge, you've taken every system, you know, every possible organizing system that was rooted in dignity and sustainable relationship to land, and made us into terrorists because we want to defend our right to live this way, right? And so, you know, they've found something that is really good that civil society has organized and pushed for through these institutional spaces forever, and figured out how to financialize that and create layer on layer of wrongness again to try and do the right thing. So, you know, we still need to keeping our eye on these things and keeping reparations at the forefront of how we push for all these solutions to happen. And all I can say, the only institutional space where I've seen so much progress recently, Colombia was kick-ass at the climate change talks. Colombia delayed them for another, you know, many days. I can't remember how many days, 4 more days, trying to refuse to let the negotiations end because of their lack of a non-fossil fuel treaty. They've been standing up for indigenous land rights. They've been doing forest protection. And they're having 2 international agrarian reform conferences, because land is the root of this. Access to land, true agrarian reform, where communities have access to the land to be able to sort things out according to their own knowledge systems, right? And Colombia has this government in place that's pushing for these things through decades of popular education and organizing by the Agroecology Schools Network, which see agroecology not just about the techniques, but about political education and people understanding what kind of system, rights-based system, are we pushing for collectively. They understand land rights and all these sort of things. And they pushed for a wide popular movement on these things that got a good government into place. Now Colombia is under threat. It's not just for the resources to access to gas that Trump's after. It's to shut down the government that's holding this force within the international system, to encourage other governments to actually step up. Because globally, governments have lost their power. Transnational corporations are ruling everything. You know, the nation state hardly has any power anymore. And so, you know, we've got to look at these interlinkages of things and try and rally behind the popular education that gets these kind of governments in place that are actually somewhat putting forward the will of the people.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to pick up on what some of, you know, Jyoti has said, because for me, I'm sitting with, are we asking the right questions? Yeah? Is it about us ourselves replicating some of these systems in our movements and in our organizing? You know, I think we have to be self-critical as well, all right? And should we really be participating in those spaces, or do we need to be in other spaces? I mean, we're in a global world crisis, right? A crisis of governance, a crisis of humanity, a planetary crisis, a spiritual crisis, right? And corporations aren't going to help us. We have to help ourselves, all right? Our governments aren't going to help us unless we change the government into what governments should be. They don't work for us anymore, as you rightly said. Right? They work for the corporations, or rather the corporations are running our governments. So how do we reclaim true democracy, true people power? Is anyone here participating in sort of civil society action around the G20? Does anyone know what the G20 does? And policies and whatever they're coming up with? All right? I think, you know, there are cracks, and we can be those weeds. Yeah, those deep, tap-rooted weeds that you can't get rid of, no matter how much glyphosate, how much what, yeah? No matter how you dig it out, right? That is who we need to be, all right? And we need to come up in these spaces, right? And be the voice of reason, yeah? And bring in the realities of the grounds, all right? Bring in, all right? And I don't even want to use solutions anymore, because we know what we have to do, yeah? We've been doing it all along, all right? We just need support. And I think this is where philanthropy comes in, and even philanthropy has to change, all right? Because shouldn't it be a common separation, wealth for everyone, rather than a group of people holding wealth and deciding who's worthy? Yeah, all right? So there's so many systems in this world that need to change. They're all interrelated. And we need to start thinking in that systems change rather than just tinkering around the edges and putting on sticky plasters.
Thank you. Barbara.
Okay, mine is a simplified version, actually. But I've got to take what you both said. I think we forget that we're all interconnected. That in order to have a solution, I guess everybody is looking for one size fits all, that we can name one organization, one corporation, or one country that has succeeded, and then we all follow the map. No. In order for us to achieve our goal going forward, we have to take everybody from different sectors, whether it's land, diet, businesses, you name it, everybody has to come together. And with that interconnectedness and everybody coming together, that's when we begin to find a solution. And I think it's that forgetting, but I've got to, if you're asking the question, where can you go to? For me, number one, Oxford Real Farmers has been such a bright light that I've seen it transform from when I first did, I guess, the opening session speech. I was in the main hall, and I spoke about Zambia. At that time, everybody was only dealing with everything UK. I spoke about Zambia and our partnership with Japan. And I guess in my mind, I was like, these people are looking at me like, you're all the way from Africa. What do, you know, we're here to talk about businesses in the UK and agribusinesses in the UK. But I've seen it transform over the years, as we were saying earlier, to become an international space. But the best part about it actually was last year when we had a session with Shume International. We spoke about the spirituality and interconnectedness of this world. And the response was unbelievable, because when the UN tried to do it, there wasn't much response. It was almost like, oh, we can't speak about the fact that there's a spiritual interconnectedness to this world and the food we eat. No, we've got to talk about the business and the language and emissions and whatever. We've got to keep it corporate. But then we forget that we are part of this land. We're interconnected. When you see the opening session this morning, that was powerful, with all the different farmers talking about their lives and their changes, and then the closing with the taiko drums. I'm sorry, for me, that wakes up a whole nother level of where humans should be. We're killing ourselves. We're staying down here and trying to be all, yes, we know the language, we're corporate. No, wake up and smell the coffee. That if we do not make changes now, the only people that are going to suffer for it are our children in the future. And when you look around now, and the audience now, there are not very many young people. We need to introduce more young people to these conversations because they're going to be the custodians of this land. We need to involve them now. And we need to involve them at every level. We've hidden enough behind corporate social responsibility and all the big languages and philanthropy and everything being said. We need to remember that you are what you eat. You are the environment you put yourself in. So I'm keeping it simple. We're interconnected, whether you come from the UK, whether you come from Japan, and forums like this present that. And for me, the last 2 decades, my experience and being part of Shume International and breaking it down to the spirituality and simplicity of what this world should be has helped not only me, but thousands of farmers. So we need to go back to the grassroots, learn from there, and shine a light from there.
Thank you. Anna?
So I'm thinking, so much of what you said, I was thinking about sharing too, and I think, you were bringing up the opening this morning, and it was so, that moment where we were asked to just kind of tap into what brings us here, remind ourselves why we are here, and bringing in music, and bringing in that connection to, this conversation around listening to the land, and I would expand that to listening to the land and listening to the water, and really tapping back into that purpose, that sense of purpose. I found that very profound, and I'm so glad you mentioned that again. So just a couple things that were coming up to add to everything that has been said. I think one of the things that we have been trying to do at the Global Alliance and been thinking about is how do we really strengthen what we think of as like an inside-outside strategy, and how do we make sure that we are helping to get the voices of those who should really be on the inside and heard by those on the inside, and how do we support those on the outside to push for kind of a shifting of what we would call that Overton window, or shifting of what's politically possible to create an opening and space for those who are on the inside to say, look what's being demanded of us on the outside, to create some space to really, make some change. And again, is it moving as fast as we want to? No, but I think how do we keep that sense of interconnectedness across our movements and those really trusted dialogues of those who are on the inside, those who are on the outside, to be able to make systematic change. So that's one thing I would say. And then Nicole, you were asking, where are some of those spaces of powerful organizing? The last time Sabrina and I were together was in September in Sri Lanka for the Nyaleni Global Forum, and I know you were there. And I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you were at the Nyaleni Global Forum? Okay, for those tuning in online, we have 2 hands out of, 100 people or so. But I think many of you have heard of the Nyaleni process, Nyaleni Global Forum, organized by, I would describe it as kind of the world's social movements around not just food systems, but workers' rights and women's rights, and so many other, and pastoralists, really coming together. This was the 3rd Global Forum, and brought together, there were 700 people from more than 100 countries, incredible deep organizing. And I had been to the first Nyaleni in 2007, 2008 in Mali, and it was really incredible to see just even how much the world's social movements have become even more interconnected and organized, and bringing in so many other voices into that space. And Sabrina and I were there as part of the first time of having a donor delegation. So there was 20 of us as part of a donor delegation to really think about how is it that donors can support and people in philanthropy can support financial autonomy for social movements, and really supporting the resourcing needs to be able to support that kind of organizing. So I would talk about Nyaleni as this other really important space and forum that, again, I saw some hands, and I know folks, you all have been really involved in, as a really powerful place for setting movement agendas, organizing around shared strategy, shared language. And if you all haven't seen it, you can look at the Candy Declaration that you mentioned, Dee, and to see some of that shared language coming out of that process.
Thank you. Sabrina.
I was thinking about, how corporations, these transnational corporations, always behave, especially in food system. They always have this vertical integration, and they're so good, they're so efficient, and they merge seeds corporations with agrochemical corporations, and they think systemically all the time, because they need to control the whole food system from the field to the fork. So I'm thinking the movements also need to think at this integration level from a justice perspective, obviously not from a profit perspective, and the change that needs to be also structural. So we always need to be skeptical of solutions that promise easy wins without structural change. So structural changes mean ending speculation of food, ending financialization of our common goods like water, land, reducing dependence on fossil fuels from agrochemicals, relocalizing food systems, promoting peasant agroecology, and promoting land rights, agrarian reforms, seed sovereignty, public finance. And then again, where is the money going? Money is going to the wrong pockets. So it's about subsidizing alternative, tax reliefs, and public procurement of food, and also, restructuring the same way that, the large corporations think systemically at global level. We also have to think systematically, at global level, changing the trade system, the tax system, debt in countries in the global south. I mean, it seems so big, but then we see spaces like Nyeleni that have this conversation, and they are planning together these global strategies and interconnected struggles. So I think that we need to support those processes and build power there, basically, and because I believe that the struggle is. I can't identify one space, but I believe that the struggle needs to take place in different spaces. I still hope that multilateral institutions can bring the change. There are important, like you mentioned, the Committee for Food Security or the International Plant Treaty. So there are important spaces that need the presence of movements and need to be strengthened. But at the same time also, local, regional change, national change, still putting pressure on governments. And so the resistance has to be different levels and geographical levels, both local and global.
Thank you. So this has been a very rich conversation, and I'm very curious what questions you all have for the speakers here. So if you have a question, now's the time. Raise your hand. And we've got microphones going around. We also might have questions from online or soon coming in. So you're encouraged to also write in questions. So I'd like to take a couple first, and then we have them answered. So we've got one here.
Hi, ladies. Thank you. So I'm wondering about the idea of biomimicry, about our human systems sort of starting to utilize what these systems that Mother Nature has built, which are infinitely efficient. And I'm just feeling there are so many people who are doing so much amazing work, and I hear what you say, Barbara, about the fact that it needs to be reflected in what we see and what's reflected back to us so we understand the progress we're making. But I suppose my question is around each individual's energy is finite. And so where are we wasting energy? There are so many people that are involved in this that I just feel like, whereas nature systems are so excellent with energy usage, like where are we as a movement of people trying to do this stuff, wasting energy?
Thank you. Another question? There's one down here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Tosado from the Center for International Environmental Law. I work on the intersection of fossil fuels and food systems. So if you want to talk about fossil fertilizers, this is me, and ammonia. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I was wondering how to not waste energy and which spaces are the best ones to engage in. And Colombia was mentioned as like an actor that is actually like one of the most promising, at least countries that is like leading the way forward. And there's this conference in Santa Marta that Colombia is organizing with the Netherlands on a just transition away from fossil fuels because they felt frustrated with the international process with the UNCCC. And I'd be very curious to hear your insights into this process. Like, does it make sense for us food sovereignty and food justice activists to engage in that process? And is like food and agriculture on that agenda enough? And is that a space that we should all have on our radar? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there one more question to take? Okay, over here.
Hello, Peter is my name. I found saying the COP30 was a total failure actually damaging. It's almost saying, you know, people are hurting the earth by fossil fuels. Let us move to a different planet. I think these are weak mechanisms that are still needed. You can't abandon them. Otherwise, you will let the biggest group there, the fossil fuel lobbyists, not even needing a different language anymore, because they will speak directly to the governments. These mechanisms are complicated, as you mentioned, and you have to deal with that complexity. If you really want to, I think, reduce, if we do, sorry, I'm not accusing, but we have to speak to the government of China. It's the biggest emitter of CO2 equivalent emissions. Then you have to speak to the United States. Then you have to speak to the other nations. So that's one level. The second level is we need to bring in indigenous voices to the platforms such as climate COPs. We did that at the last COP. We brought poor indigenous representatives from different islands around the world to the COP30, working with the parties, which are usually countries, so that their voice is being heard. It's extremely important. But to say that it's a failure, it's a bit much. Now, there are some alternatives, such as biodiversity COP. And I think our groups here can do more at the biodiversity COP than at the climate COP. Climate COPs are very sexy. They're also very huge. But you may achieve a bit more at the biodiversity COP, especially when it comes to agriculture. Then there are other platforms, such as G20. We are involved with them. And I think it is important to work with them. And I agree, we only have limited capacity, limited energy, so we have to think through what are the organizations that work best in terms of convincing the parties, which are usually, countries, so that they change their behaviors. And most of the climate COPs currently are about implementation, so very little can be changed. But we can hold those governments accountable. Sorry, I was a bit provocative.
Okay, so 3 questions there. One on biomimicry and where energy is being wasted and could be redirected. And then 2 on 2 spaces that we haven't talked about. This upcoming conference in Colombia on fossil fuel phase out and the biodiversity COP. So just raise your hand if you'd like to tackle any of those. Sabrina?
No, just wanted to answer quickly to his observation. Absolutely, I think that the biodiversity COP is a critical space for agriculture because really very technical issues are being discussed, like digital sequence informations, genetic information, genetic diversity, agrobiodiversity. So the presence of peasants, farmers movements there is critical because they are passing statements around corporate power and control of genetic information of nature, It's pretty scary. So we need to popularize more these spaces. We need to bring more political education about what is happening there, and we need to bring a bigger delegation of farmers and movements in those spaces too. So I 100% agree that it's an important space.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that. I'm curious how many of you have ever heard of the term NBSAP? NBSAP? Okay. Again, for those tuning in, we had like maybe 8 hands go up, which is like more than I think I've ever seen go up when I've asked this question before. So that stands for the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan. And as Sabrina was saying, and your question about other places, other multilateral spaces for us to organize in, the Convention on Biological Diversity is, I think, one of these really critical spaces. And I didn't go to the COP, but I did go to the biodiversity COP. I was in Colombia last year. And theoretically, every country should be writing an NBSAP. Every country has been tasked with developing a strategy around biodiversity. And so one of the things that we did was support frontline leaders from fishing and farming spaces, both farmers, fishers, those working with farmers and fishers, to go to the COP at Colombia to be a voice for fishers, small-scale farmers. And we produced a report with some partners, including some partners who are here, called, it was so wonky and specific, but it was called Boosting Biodiversity Through Agroecology. And it was designed to speak to those people tasked in their countries to write their NBSAPs to see that food systems can be a tool for biodiversity. That food systems are one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss from the agrotoxics, as you said, Sabrina, but that it can also be this really powerful tool. So I think that that's another important multilateral space for us to engage in. I certainly saw with my own eyes what it was like to be there. And for the first time, they had a full day, official full CBD day on food. And we were able to get a frontline leader delegation representative on every single panel they had that day to really bring those voices there. I just want to say one last thing, because I really loved your question about biomimicry and this question about where is energy wasted. And I think that I can think about that on a really individual level, like where do I let my energy get wasted? Like maybe scrolling the news this morning, maybe might have been one of those little individual energy wasting moments. I will also say one of the things we also know from nature is that it is incredibly abundant and biodiverse, and that often it's overflowing with that abundance and the multiplicity of entities and organisms. And so sometimes I hear colleagues who are like, oh, but there's, it's too crowded a space, or there's too many organizations, too many alliances, and actually I think that one of the things we need to do is actually redundancy is a healthy thing. Like we need to have a multiplicity of players so that, when Joy Tea gets exhausted one day, they're not any day soon, we hope that you'll continue for decades to come, but there's other partners to come in, right? That we want to have a sort of a multiplicity of actors, that we can't be scarce in our mindset about what does it look like, that we want to bring more people in and not worry too much about duplication is kind of a message that I'm increasingly seeing, that there's some power in redundancy and the power of many of us saying the same thing over and over again for decades and decades. So I would just add that, but I love this provocative question for us to keep asking ourselves institutionally, where are we wasting energy? Individually, where are we wasting energy? And to really call upon ourselves to where we can not waste the energy when we don't need to be. So thank you for that.
Barbara, and then Joy Tea.
I think I'm gonna take what you said, right? So the multiplicity is a great word. And I think the question is, for me, where have we wasted a lot of energy in the last 30 years when we're talking about the COP30 and everything? I think at some point in my very youthful days, I used to look at things and be like, oh, this person, everybody that comes on the scene wants to be a hero. Everybody wants to be a superhero. They're the ones who've cracked this case or solved that case or this and that. I've always been a great believer that in sustainability, replication is also a good thing. Identifying what's powerful, what works, and saying, I want to learn from you. Africa over the last 3 decades has not replicated, but started new projects. So there is no continuity. Even the UN system is guilty of that. Organizations come in, they start a project, it has a 3-year to 5-year lifespan, it dies because you did not equip the people on the ground with the right tools to make it sustainable. There is no ownership. We've come in as your saviors. We're here to put this project in. It's going to change your lives. 3 years later, there's no more financing. I disappear. Well, the building you've built, we've broken it down. We've taken the parts to our own homes because you did not equip me with the right tools. You keep your office in the capital city, but you're not coming to the rural area to empower me to be the one to look after the project, to be the leader. So there's too much. We're starting a new project. Oh, we've taken the data from this, and we're starting another project. Oh, yes, we bought, 50 cows per farmer. You go back to that farmer, and he doesn't even have one of those 50 you gave him. So there's too much of the funding is here, give it to you. Oh, you haven't changed. It's okay, a new project has come up. So yes, it's great to have so many projects, but there needs to be ownership. So we've wasted a lot of energy and time when we could have progressed further because there has to be continuity. There has to be ownership in these projects and teach people to fish. That saying didn't come out of nowhere. Teach people to fish. Don't just give them the fish, teach them to fish. But with a lot of this trying to change the world, here's the fish, look at the data, we've changed people's lives, the news is great, life carries on, next project. You're not changing anything. You're just making yourself look good in newspapers and on television, but you're not changing anything. So that's where a lot of the energy for me has gone. I think moving forward from here, we need to identify where the spaces are. She's asked that question twice. Nicole, you've asked that question twice. Where are the spaces? Let's identify those spaces and let's replicate and focus on sustainability. I think that's the biggest key for me.
Thank you. Jyoti?
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I thought the best way I could think about how we save energy, and the way I do, is seeing change as an ecosystem in the same way that we all are doing different things. And what we need is a movement of movements that really move things forward. And what I saw very powerfully in Brazil and actually felt the energy of, after sailing across 21 days on the ocean, our boat came in to the mouth of the Amazon River under the full moon, and the whole way there, giving thanks to the wind and the goddess of the wind and the gods of the ocean and the spirits that are carrying us there, and all the cosmovisions coming together and being woven together there. You could feel the power of that globally shifting. I can tangibly feel, the power of the Renaissance of this, of cosmovisions that have been really tamped down by this materialistic rise of postmodern capitalism that has destroyed things. But, we're all within an ecosystem of change that mimics nature. Some of us may be very good artists, poets, singers. Some may be direct action activists who can go and smash up a war machine. Somebody else can be somebody that writes really good spreadsheets. Somebody else can deal with, how you steward people in and feed them when they're at a conference. And I saw Movimento Sem Terra in action in Brazil, which is a social movement. And it's a movement that's about collective action. And so much of the disempowerment I feel when I come back to the UK and see how individualistic the actions are, that's a product of neoliberal capitalism to make you feel like you're alone. Within indigenous communities, within social movements that have powerfully shifted things all the way up to governmental levels and changes in governments, or even more powerfully in creating whole new economic systems that exist outside of capitalism. It's really wonderful to see these strong cooperatives in other places and things like that. It's because people aren't operating just on their own. It's not just about what you can buy through your pocketbook, or which individual choices you make, or what diet you can adopt, or what gender you can call yourself. Those are all individual choices that sit within a collective of systemic change, and the ecosystem of change mimics nature in that you can have your part to play as part of the collective, so you don't have to take it all on yourself. And that change doesn't just rely on you, it relies on that ecosystem of change that we can all be a part of. And if we see ourselves as an organism that's moving together towards harmony and peace and a global shift of energies through whatever power we can put in, and feel that hope because it's real, then the despair that crushes us, the despair they purposefully orchestrate within us by making us feel individualistic, by news that makes you think everything that's happening is bad, is what's going to destroy us. And if you can let go of that and actually see what's moving, what has not failed, what is in motion, what is alive, and you follow what is making us and keeping us alive, and that passion and that power, then we will succeed. And I feel that, we are in a moment in history that's one of the most important ones that we can ever be in, where, the crises that face us are global. I was like crushed by the idea of like, oh my God, we might be in World War III when Trump starts like moving at Cuba and Colombia and all these places that I've drawn such inspirations from. But those powers are strong, and we're at a point where we can weave ourselves into that ecosystem and actually be uplifted by that power and the bravery and the courage that exists across that movement. And I came back from Brazil, and my friend that was in prison, I went to go visit them, and I had this coconut ring, which is a symbol across Latin America of those who work for justice. And if you wear that, it's a symbol of being a part of the resistance. And I went into my prison visit, and I went there with Jeremy Corbyn, and we kind of slid the coconut ring across under a cup because you're not supposed to touch the prisoners. And my friend Amu had a very thin finger from the hunger strike and put it on, and then started asking me, well, what links can we draw between demilitarization and all that money that's going into all these planes and how that money can be spent on building peace? And I was just thinking, we are weaving through the tremendous bravery of every single person that stays up late at night filling in a spreadsheet, every single person that's doing this work, every single person that's planting those seeds and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go, let their chickens out and milk their cows and do this work across the planet to build peace and harmony, the ones that are taking their children to school, the ones that are, just doing what they do to build peace across this world. And I know that if we can focus on that and not focus on the despair and focus on the courage of everyone who is fighting that, not just the fact that they're suffering or struggling, but the fact that they're doing that because they believe in it, then we know that we can win. And that's what nature does. Nature just survives, and it adapts with resilience, and it flourishes where it can flourish, and the suffering that's part of nature is actually part of that natural process of what we can all abide by. And that's mimicking the ecosystem. If us as humanity bind ourselves with the progress of history as it is as an ecosystem and truly bond ourselves with nature and the land and each other, then we will win.
These are such beautiful, powerful final words. We're over time, but can we just go a little bit more? Just two more words, one sentence.
Well, guess what? I've made my entire career, disrupting, dismantling. I'm claiming space, I'm claiming time, I'm standing up as well, right? This is much more than representing us as justice. This connects us to the people of Brazil. It connects us to the land, right? And to draw on what Barbara said, we are interconnected, right? And it's not about mimicking. We are part of this biodiversity, right? And that is what we need to remember, right? And that is where our power lies, in our interconnectedness. And what they try to do is to disrupt that by keeping us apart. But we will find ways to gather, to build, to co-create, to birth a new world. That is our work, right? That is where I'm putting my energy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to the Oxford Real Farming Conference for having us, and thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you so much for being with us.